Okay, everybody. Welcome. All right, so today we are going to be doing things a little bit different than last week. I don't know if you guys can hear me. Last week we had some audio issues, and apparently people couldn't hear me on YouTube. I don't know if that's the case now. Um, Let me just check. All right, yeah, sounds like we're good. All right, great. Okay, so um, where to begin? Okay, so this week we're going to be really focusing on one topic, and we're just going to kind of dissect it and go really in deep on it. And then maybe if I have some time, I'll get into some other topics of some things that I've been thinking about this week when it comes to lifting and all sorts of things. So I wanted to do something initially on pre-workout. I wanted to have like a based or cringed about pre-workout, and I don't know. I wasn't really, the answer is pretty straightforward, so it's not really that big of a mystery. I'll talk about. I guess I'll talk about pre-workout a bit. But our main topic today is going to be on the stimulus to fatigue ratio, the SFR. The purpose behind this concept is it's not to make us turn into scientists with our workouts, but it is to sort of highlight concepts that maybe you knew intuitively, but you hear it put into words. It sort of makes it more concrete, and then moving forward with your workouts, you kind of you go from there basically. So I hope everybody's been having a good week of workouts so far, and your diets have been on track. A lot of you guys in GainTrust have been using the form checks a lot, which is awesome. I highly encourage that, because I think, to me, you get the most out of the program when your form is being checked. I think there's a lot of things that are important about the program, but having somebody look at your work and be like, okay, this has to be improved, that has to be improved. There's a couple of things. There's one thing that I think everybody needs to improve on. I've never seen anybody send in a perfect form check yet. And the one thing that I think stands out with everybody, I do this too, but I'm actively working on it myself as well. But it's really the tempo that stands out to me the most. A lot of you guys have pretty good form. It's not form is not like always an issue. It doesn't seem like that. Like it seems like the form is like 80% there, and in a lot of cases, 80% there will get the job done. For where you're at. In terms of skill level. But we'll definitely correct with that. But definitely tempo is something that I've noticed is the weak point for most people who submit. This is across the board, so don't feel like you're being called out here. And I guess the one way that I would sort of describe the tempo issue is that the eccentric and the concentric are the same for everybody, for both movements, both in the it's like a 1 second eccentric, a 1 second concentric, and it ends up with things that look like something like this. And look, you're still doing work and whatever, but you're not maximizing your work. And I really I want people to do is to focus their eccentrics, so that nice, not for everything, but for a lot of things, a nice like 2 second eccentric where you're slowing it down and you're really getting a nice stretch in whatever muscle you're working. And then there should be a moment at the bottom right where you're anticipating the push, and the push should be unique and separate from the eccentric. A lot of times when you're getting into this rhythm of sorts, when you get into this rhythm, you're taking out a lot of the how do I put this? You're taking away the 1 second, guys. I gotta mute myself. I hear it echo over here. You're taking away the I want to say purpose, but that's not the right word. You're taking something away when you get into this, and don't take this the wrong way, but it is a bit of a mindless thing. If you're mindlessly, eccentric, concentric, same thing, it's mindless. If you could just get it into your head that concentric motion really needs to be all about squeezing your muscles, then you could maybe understand that that's a special totally unique way of moving a weight. If you're thinking of just controlling the weight the whole time, that's okay. It could teach you better control overall. But really, what you want to avoid is momentum. We don't want to use momentum. We don't want to let ourselves cheat. We want to make things basically as hard as they have to be in order to get the most out of your lifts. So just take that for what it is. It's everybody does it. I do it myself, especially later in the workout especially when I'm really in the zone. Sometimes I'll find myself doing that, but you got to remember, slow down, and there has to be a separation mentally between the eccentric and the concentric. It's a different animal. The eccentric is really, in a lot of ways, it's about preparing the concentric. Because let's say your eccentric is sloppy. Well, before you can then press the weight after that, you now have to adjust the position and then press. Instead, your eccentric should be the thing that loads up the concentric, so you're already ready to push. And then there's that moment, and you can think of it as a pause, or you can actually insert a real pause. And there's that mental pause where there's a very real separation between those two movements, and then there is the explosive rep. And I've said this before, what I don't mean by explosive reps is, I don't mean every rep has to be lightweight and yanking the thing. I just mean that there has to be a real powerful exertion of force that is unique to the concentric, and not just sort of more controlling the weight up and down, up and down. Okay, so with that addressed, I guess I'll go into. I didn't do much research on this, but this is just me kind of winging it, talking about pre-workout, based or cringe. I didn't do a slide for this, but I'll just get into sort of my thoughts on pre-workout. There are two types of pre-workout. To my knowledge, you have the stimulus. You have the stimulant ones, and then you have the non-stimulant ones. The quick and easy answer is stimulant-based, non-stimulant cringe. There are some caveats to that, and they should be kind of obvious. Stimulants are stimulants. You don't want to abuse them. If they could be avoided, I think it's probably healthy to avoid if you can. But if you're really looking, the one time that I really I don't encourage pre-workout. I take it sometimes. I don't always take it, but the one thing I would say about my experience with pre-workout that I thought was a positive was going from somebody who had never taken anything. Oh, and first of all, if anybody doesn't know what pre-workout is, so I don't know the levels of people who are watching or listening in GainTrust. Most GainTrust people, I think, know what this is. But a pre-workout is a powder you put into a drink, or water. Sorry, you mix it into a water right before you work out, maybe 30 minutes before you work out, and it's got a lot of caffeine in it. But it's got also other things in it. I'm not really well versed on exactly what's in it, so I can't list them off and sound impressive. But it's got other things that are meant to. I think there's stimulants and something like that. And if anybody knows anything about crazy pre-workout, they will tell you things like, back in my day, we had C4, not C4, but people would really talk about Jack 3D or Jacked. Depends on what part of the country you're from. They either pronounce the 3 as an E. So it's either Jacked or Jack 3D. And the original formula of Jack 3D is this sort of magic thing that was, absolutely, killer. It would give you the craziest sort of workouts. And then it was quickly taken off the shelves because it was dangerous. So you start to get an understanding, if you don't already, that this stuff is you're playing with stimulants, and that's not caffeine is a stimulant, and so it depends on your comfort level. But that's the downside. The upside is I've from experiencing the change in mentality and in pump, in mindset. Pump usually comes from the NO2 side of things. They have a pump sort of additive to the pre. Anyway, the point is how it could be really based in, because I gave it a base rating, is because you can, before you ever have taken pre-workout, you have an idea of what it's like to go to the gym, and you have sort of your anxieties or your expectations, or maybe you're not feeling it that day, or maybe you are feeling it that day, but you haven't really had this, experience of like this holy experience in the gym where it's like you're in the zone, you're zoned in, you're totally focused, and your muscles, you could feel every fiber of your muscle as you're working it. Your mind muscle connection is extremely heightened, and it's like, well, that can actually be achieved sometimes, especially early on when people try pre-workout, and this can be achieved, by it's basically taking a lot of caffeine, and why I think that's a good thing and not a bad thing is it's an experience. Like, unless you have issues with your heart, I wouldn't play around. I would probably consult with your doctor. But the point is that kind of experience can unlock for you something mentally that like you didn't know was there. You didn't know that you can have that intense of a mind muscle connection. You didn't know that you can have that big of a pump. You didn't know that you could be that focused, or that it could be like a religious experience. Like I joke that it's a religious experience, but I've my whole life I've been lifting, and there have been times where some of my lifts were like holy lifts. Like, I know that's sacrilegious, but I'm just saying they were these really intense experiences where I was just completely in the zone, and the concepts of mind muscle connection just become so clear, because I don't know exactly why, but you're really in it sometimes. Doesn't always work that way. The downside of pre-workout is that you build up a tolerance to things like caffeine and whatever else is in there. It doesn't work as well. Then you got to do double scoop, and that's where you're entering dangerous territory. Don't do that. My advice to you is give it a try once in a while. Don't rely on it every time, and find stuff that's worth that's been tested, and not something that will be taken off the shelf in a few months. So yeah, you got to do a little bit of your homework, but in that instance, it's incredibly based. Non-stimulant pre-workouts, cringe. Why are they cringe? I tried it a bunch of times. I just don't feel anything. And it's not that like I'm not waiting for like an experience, like a high or something like that, but I just didn't feel anything. There was no change in how I felt. I had a decent workout on it the other day. I took a non-stimulant pre-workout, but it just didn't do anything for me, really. I didn't get anything out of it. And if I did, it was so little that I didn't even notice. And I think it's kind of a waste of money. I think it's just better off taking EAAs at the gym. And I touched really quickly on EAAs. Some people say they're not necessary because, if you get enough protein in your diet, you're getting all your essential amino acids anyway. It'll be inside of your body, in your bloodstream and whatnot. And it's basically, you're fine. I take it anyway, just because I want to. It's not going to do any harm, but also because it makes my water taste good. And I just feel it even could be a placebo effect. It makes me feel replenished a bit, sort of like how a Gatorade would be replenishing over a water or something like that. If you like water a lot, and you've got plenty of protein in your diet. You're eating meats all day long or whatever. Every few hours you're having like a high protein meal. Are they completely necessary? No, probably not. You probably have enough to sustain you in your workouts. I like it anyway, so that's just a quick aside. A question here: are there pre-workouts that don't make you feel itchy? Is that just me? No. Here's the thing. When my pre-workout makes me feel itchy, that's when I know I'm going to have a good workout. I remember there's like this burning itchiness sensation that you actually get. It's true. From some pre-workouts where like your skin tingles. That's when I know I'm going to have a good workout with pre-workout. It might be a little bit uncomfortable, but I've always sort of like laughed and sort of leaned into it. I thought it was kind of fun or funny or whatever, but some people say they hate the sensation. If you hate the sensation, then it probably won't be something you'll like. It's something for me that I actually it tells me that I got whatever I'm taking is probably going to be off the shelf in 2 months, and that means it's going to be really good. That's not true, but anyway, you get the idea. So pre-workout based or cringe, it's both. The stimulant one's based. Non-stim is cringe. Okay. All right. Actually, this week I was going to talk about raw milk versus pasteurized milk. I didn't get a chance to look into it as much as I wanted to. I could give you a quick little overview of some of the issues that I came across, and one of them was that, and I'm sure many of you know this, but raw milk is the stuff that's right out of a cow. It's not been heated to, kill off any dangerous bacteria or whatever that's in there. We started pasteurizing milk, which is sort of the heating process of milk, around the turn of the century, when a lot of these dairy farmers, or dairy sort of, I guess you call them farmers, moved into cities. And from my research, there's apparently that these cows would be eating the leftover grain or whatever from these breweries that they were like built next door to. And the diets were so bad that these cows were getting sick and their milk was suffering because of that. And because after a round of people getting sick and they realized it was the milk, they had to start doing this thing called pasteurization. But those practices of not having healthy cows has been largely, I think, that they've been sort of made a lot better. And so on average, pasteurization is just sort of this thing that's held over. It's sort of held over sort of arbitrarily in a lot of ways, or maybe as like a just in case, sort of like sort of an insurance policy. But anyway, I haven't looked into what sort of are the implications of pasteurization. But the big hubbub is that sort of raw milk is sort of this X factor in our diets, or in human diets, that is sort of maybe one of the reasons why we have weak men these days. To give you my sort of initial reaction to this, I think that's probably nonsense. I think there's probably enough in our diets otherwise. I don't think people drinking milk really changes too much of, across the board. I don't know. Could be wrong. It's probably worth looking more into, but my knee-jerk reaction is that it's probably not as big of a deal as we're made to believe it is. Pasteurized milk probably is pretty good for you. But it is interesting that this has actually sort of been this sort of recent development in human history. Before this, we'd only drink raw milk. So it really brings up some, more of this sort of like diet war that's going on. We had the eggs last week, we had raw milk this week, and so you have these sort of things that are on people's minds, which I think it's actually kind of interesting that people are sort of, going against the grain of these sort of diets that we've been told for our whole lives. If you remember the dietary pyramid, you have this huge sort of, bread on the bottom of the dietary pyramid, right? Like the base of your diet should be bread. And so it's like, I don't know, maybe in 100 years we'll find out that was the best. But anyway, the point is that, a lot of these things that people say, or that we've been grown up to believe, that's actually, it's not always been the best, as we've seen the results in America, and in the West largely, even in England, in, Great Britain, you have people who are, they made fun of Americans like 20 years ago. They look completely the same as Americans today. So, the West has a lot of things going wrong. Needless to say, I don't know that it's the milk in particular, or even sort of people's sort of, how they feel about eggs or whatever like that. I know that's not what they're claiming, but these I think are very edge issues but they're interesting. So we'll look more into it week to week. Anyway, but that brings us to our main topic today, the stimulus to fatigue ratio, the SFR. This concept is, like I said at the beginning of the talk, this is one that I don't think really, I don't think this is something that you need to be overly concerned with in terms of, writing down, because there's a calculation that we're going to go into here. But this is very much to be something to just keep in the back of your mind when you're working out, and sort of understand these concepts, because I think it could help you sort of flesh things out a little bit in the future. So SFR, what is it? SFR is stimulus to fatigue ratio, measures how much muscle stimulus you get for the fatigue cost of training. So it's a ratio, like it suggests, and the ratio is between muscle stimulus, meaning like how effective are your workouts on your target muscles, versus the fatigue cost of that sort of, the fatigue cost period, just in general of that exercise. So it's basically, you can think of this thing as sort of like a rating for your workouts. So what is the rating of a deadlift in terms of SFR? Because I need to plan out my workout so that I'm not going to, you'll see actually, you'll understand as we move forward. So SFR, hypertrophy stimulated over fatigue generated. So that's the calculation. That's the ratio. So it's how much hypertrophy is stimulated, muscle growth, how much muscle growth is stimulated versus over the fatigue generated. All right. So first, let's get into fatigue, the types and how do we quantify it. There are 3 types of fatigue and how we quantify it. You'll see as follows. But the 3 types of fatigue are joint and connective tissue disruption, perceived exertion. That should sound familiar to many of you guys if you have been keeping up with RPE. That's rate of perceived exertion. This is sort of a similar or exact concept to that. And then we have unused muscle performance. Okay. So joint and connective tissue disruption. So the general concept here is that some exercises work the joints and connective tissues more than others, while still providing relatively the same stimulus. A good example of this is if you think of the low and high bar deadlift. They both have like a roughly similar sort of muscle stimulus for your quads, for example. But the low bar actually is more fatiguing, so to your whole body. So in that case, that SFR would be one SFR would be higher than the other. And that's because a low bar has, I think it employs more of your back and your even your grips and your wrist and everything like that. So overall, it's more fatiguing to relatively the same stimulus. The other fatigue would be perceived exertion. Some workouts drain you physically and psychologically faster than others. Deadlifts, for example, stimulate muscle very well, but comes at a high exertion cost. That sort of makes sense if that would be the case. So example. Oh, and an example of this of perceived exertion is when we use swinging of a movement or momentum with a movement. And we're swinging the weights. Like the reason why you would swing a weight, meaning like it's really heavy. So you want to I just want to get the weight up. It's really heavy. I can't do it with perfect form, so I'm going to do it with shit form by swinging or whatever. That's high fatigue, low stimulus. So perceived exertion is a rating system of that phenomenon. And then we have unused muscle performance. This is sort of like how much fatigue has been done to you systematically from one exercise to the other when that next exercise has nothing to do with the first one. So for example, like a leg workout first and then a chest workout right after. How likely is that leg workout going to fatigue you with the chest workout? So in the example here, we have leg curls, and then you go from leg curls and you do dumbbell shoulder press. That is, likely to be a lot easier than if you were to do something like deadlifts and then go to a machine shoulder press. That'd be much harder because the overall systemic fatigue is a lot higher with the deadlifts. So those are the 3 types of fatigue that we have to consider moving forward with fatigue. Stimulus factors. So stimulus factors, there are 3 stimulus factors. We have the mind-muscle connection, we have the muscle pump, and the muscle disruption. Very straightforward concepts. We've been through mind-muscle connection and pump and all that stuff before. But the level of tension basically in your target muscles while performing your exercise, that you can think of as the mind-muscle connection. The muscle pump is how big the pump was in the target muscles, meaning, how much sort of, how inflated did the muscle group get from your exercise, filled with blood, really, basically. And muscle disruption, level of fatigue or soreness in that target muscle after you work out. And then we move into calculating these things. So first we're going to calculate stimulus. So I'm going to leave this here. We don't have to get too deep into it, but the overall concept here is you can rate these things. You could rate these concepts, and you can sort of do this mental check while you're exercising, or right after you're exercising, or just have it in the back of your mind somewhere. We'll go through a few of them. So my muscle connection from a 0 means you're not aware of your target muscles during your exercises at all. It's like you're doing a chest press and you're like, I feel these in my forearms. It's like, okay, well, you're not hitting the target muscle group with your mind muscle connection is 0 for your mind muscle connection. Muscle pump, that's simple. 0 would be no pump, and nothing happens. You're working out, and it's just like, I'm still Greg or whoever. I'm still Jim. I don't know what that even means. Anyway, a 3 on that would be a massive muscle pump in that muscle group. So, very straightforward, very easy to sort of calculate this stuff out in your head. And then muscle disruption. It goes from a 0 of no fatigue or soreness in the muscle group to 3, you felt very much weaker in that target muscle right after training, and then had soreness for days after training. So you can kind of assume what goes in between all those. And now calculating fatigue, joint and connective tissue disruption. A 0 on that scale would be minimal or no pain in joints or connective tissue. A 3 would be developed chronic pain in the joints and connective tissue that persists days or even weeks. That's a real problem if that's the case. And you know it when it happens. Perceived exertion, 0. That means your training was easy and you felt fine afterwards. Meaning I trained and it's like, I'm going to get some ice cream after this, and maybe I'll do all this other stuff. I feel great. I just feel great. And I don't mean feeling great as in like you feel invigorated. I mean like feeling great as though like, it was a breeze. Working out was a breeze today. And a 3 is all out effort. You're drained for days. Now that's extreme, okay? Let me just point something out. You're not weird if that hasn't happened to you, or maybe it has happened to you, especially if you're more new to lifting and you get right into the gym and you go all out from after not working out forever and you're drained for days. Well, there you go. Your perceived exertion is a 3. But also it just makes sure what I'm not saying is for people who are more intermediate where they're not getting as sore anymore, going all out effort and being drained for days, that's extreme. Okay. That's extreme, but it's a good extreme. Maybe you should aim for that. But actually don't, because that would defeat the purpose of the reps in reserve and progressive overload in your training cycles. Okay, so last one, unused muscle performance. We went over this already, but a 0 would be the performance on the subsequent exercise targeting unused muscle was good. So let's remember what we're talking about here again. Unused muscle performance, meaning if you do like a leg workout and then you do a chest workout after, when the leg workout's a leg curl versus when the leg workout is a deadlift, which subsequent lift, in this case like a shoulder press, was going to be harder to do afterwards, and it's going to be the deadlift is going to be harder. So a 0 would be performance on the subsequent exercise targeting unused muscle was good. You had a really easy time of it, and it was actually, you got a great shoulder workout after your leg workout. A 3 is that it went very poorly. Very poorly. You were exhausted. You might have deadlifted tons and tons of weight, and now you're going to do shoulder press, and you're just like, what am I doing here? What am I doing here? This is like ridiculous. So putting it all together and doing the calculations, I just put together this example. So the way we calculate this is we have total stimulus over total fatigue, and that gives us our SFR. So for example, in this case, we have, I kind of picked out like one of my workouts from last week, and I said, my muscle connection, the stimulus factor, was a 3. I felt a big tension and a burn in my target muscles. Pump, I had a pretty decent pump in those muscle groups as well. Wasn't the biggest pump ever, but it was pretty good. And muscle disruption, some weakness and stiffness after the session in the target muscles, but recovered basically by the next day. All right, so that gets me a 6 at the stimulus. And then fatigue, joint and connectivity issue disruption, minimal or no pain in joints, connective tissue. That was a 0. Perceived exertion, 1. Effort was given but felt fine by the end of the day. I'm not proud of that one. No, I'm kidding. But that is a 1. Perceived exertion in this case, well, it's all about the SFR. It's not about, how much did you exert yourself? Because you could exert yourself a lot and get nowhere, right? So in this case, I guess 1 is a good thing. Unused muscles, I had a 0. My performance was fine on subsequent muscle groups, but I didn't really do much of that anyway. I didn't really go from legs to shoulders or whatever like that, so I kept it at a 0. And that gave me a SFR of 6, which I think is really good. I think that's a good thing. So that's how you calculate it. But here's the takeaway. I kind of touched on this already. This should be sort of more of a mental calculation. I mean, you can sit down and do this yourself and write it out yourself, and maybe you want to do that as a first couple times or whatever. But this is not something that you should be doing all the time like that. This is not meant to make you neurotic. This just sort of, these concepts just have to sort of marinate in you a bit so that you kind of have an idea of that there is a stimulus factor and that there is a fatigue factor. And these two things are antagonistic towards one another. And if you can, when you're working out, you kind of want to have a sense that you're getting more stimulus with less fatigue. Remember, these are just generalities to estimate the quality of your lift. Next week, I will probably get into sort of how to adjust to getting better SFRs. But before we getting into next week, I just want to give you an idea of what that might look like. We already talked about how if you're doing a high bar squat versus a low bar squat, that you actually will get relatively similar quad activation, but the fatigue will be higher in one versus the other. That's one way of increasing your SFR, with one exercise, and there are other ways of doing this too. And we talk about them in ways. How do you reduce sort of unnecessary fatigue from like joint and connectivity issues? Well, good form for one thing is something you can do. You can practice good form, and you can and practice good tempo and stuff like that. And also, when we talk about mind muscle connection and sort of the tips and tricks that we talk about in order to improve those things, these are all sort of ways that you can adjust to make improve your lifts. Next week, I'm thinking next week we'll get into this. Maybe we won't. But that's where I'll leave it for today. And yeah, I think. Another great concept to keep in mind. SFR is very straightforward and I think very applicable to a lot of our lifts. And I think that this will serve you guys well. If I'll have these slides in GainChat if you want to take a look at them and do it yourself. But with that being said, we'll say goodbye to YouTube and go into the Q&A portion. So take care.